Welcome to Civil War Digital Digest. I'm Will. We want to say thanks to the Michigan's GAR Memorial Hall and Museum for their welcome here today. Today, this episode is the first step in a new part of the digest. We're going to start bringing to you biographies. Now, don't expect to see Lee, Grant, Sheridan, Sherman, Stonewall Jackson. They get biographies elsewhere regularly. We want to talk to you about people whose stories are compelling out of history and who you deserve to meet. Today, the first man we want to introduce you to is Colonel Hans Christian Heg of the 15th Wisconsin.
When Hans Christian Heg was born on December 29, 1829, Norway was still a dependent nation ruled by Sweden. His father, Evan Heg, operated an inn with his wife Siri in Drammen, a town 25 miles southwest of modern Oslo on the Christiania Fjord, now known as Oslo Fjord. The town was a center of shipbuilding, timber, paper, and pulp industries. Throughout the 1830s, there was growing pressure for Norwegians to leave for the United States. The Norwegians were a proud people, descendants of the Norse Vikingers. The Norwegians chafed under centuries of foreign rule by whichever of their neighbors happened to be the strongest at that moment. Following the end of dominion by Denmark in 1814, Norwegians wrote a national constitution in a bid for independence. It was a liberal document, heavily influenced by the United States Constitution, as well as by the French Revolution and the Spanish Revolt against Joseph Bonaparte. It established a constitutional monarchy with checks and balances, and personal rights similar to the United States Bill of Rights. Norwegian independence lasted only a few months. Swedish troops defeated the poorly trained Norwegians. The resulting peace, the Convention of Moss, established Swedish domination over Norway. Over time, many Norwegians began to look to the United States as a place to build their lives. Their immigration showed a remarkable unity of purpose and was highly organized. After some investigation, they found the sparsely populated region west of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, was good land and held the chance to build a new life. In 1840, Evan Heg, his wife, and 4 children, 10-year-old Hans included, set sail for Wisconsin. They settled in the town of Muskego, 15 miles southwest of Milwaukee. There, Evan Heg set about building his own farmstead, as well as what would be a focal point of the growing Norwegian-American community. He built a large barn that served as a community center, as well as an inn. New immigrants would stop at Muskego immediately after reaching Milwaukee, until one of the Hegs or another community member could lead them to one of the outlying communities of the growing Norwegian colony. Hundreds, perhaps more than 1,000 immigrants passed through the large Heg farmstead on their way to the New World. Hans Heg would personally see many firsts for the Norwegian settlers. The first Norwegian Lutheran service in the United States, led by Klaus Clausen, took place in his father's barn, as was the first publication of a Norwegian-language newspaper, Northern Lights. Evan Heg donated the land for the first permanent Norwegian Lutheran church in the United States. The rise of the anti-immigrant know-nothings in the 1840s led to propaganda in Norway to slow the flow of those coming to the United States. Hans would have seen the debates and deliberations that created the Muskego Manifesto. It was a strong declaration from the leaders of the Norwegian-American community, including Evan Heg, that despite the resistance, waves of illness, and the hardships of the frontier, they still strongly believed in the promise of the new country and urged their former countrymen to join them. As his father evolved into one of the great leaders of the community, young Hans, as the oldest son, began to assist him, especially after the death of his mother in 1842. He grew up deeply religious. Norwegian Lutheranism is an evangelical religion, and Heg was noted for his fervent religious beliefs. He attended Sunday school as well as public school. He practiced hard at English until he spoke it with ease, force, and dignity. In 1849, Hans and 3 companions set up for California in search of gold. They crossed the continent overland on a wagon with a brace of oxen. Heg and his compatriots had more luck than many, building a credible profit before he heard of his father's passing. He returned back to Wisconsin to take over the family farm. In his 2 years in the West, Heg saw much and experienced many of the highs and lows of life. The Norwegian farm boy saw many things that he would have otherwise missed by simply living in his Wisconsin home. Within a few short months, he found himself running the 320-acre farm, caring for his younger siblings, and married to Gunhild Enog. He quickly took up his father's mantle of leadership in the Norwegian-American community. A strong abolitionist, he became a member of the Free Soil Party, a forerunner of the Republican Party. He ran for state assembly in 1852, but was narrowly defeated. He He was elected a Justice of the Peace and member of the Town Council in 1852. Later, he became chairman of the Town Council and a commissioner of Racine County. By all accounts, the young man in his mid-20s took his job seriously. He was also elected as one of the 3 commissioners of the Racine County Poor Farm. Heg was earnest in his mission to improve the lot of the poorest citizens in his county. Heg became a Republican soon after the party formed in 1854. The early Republican Party was a compromise party of many diverse interests. Former Whigs and Democrats, Free Soilers and Know-Nothings, liberals and conservatives came together in this new party. Their unifying goal was to stop the spread of slavery. The anti-immigrant Know-Nothings were strong in Wisconsin, and many Scandinavian immigrants were hesitant to support the party because of that. Heg endured the prejudice he encountered and did not let it dampen his political goal, the abolition of slavery. He served as a strong voice for the Republicans despite the Know-Nothings. Because of his efforts, Heg was on the state ballot in 1859, where he was elected Commissioner of State Prisons. He quickly proved himself a reformer who worked to improve the conditions for prisoners. He strongly advocated turning his own job from an elected political position into an appointed professional one for greater efficiency. Heg was an outspoken member of the Republican Party. He was a leader of a company of wideawakes, organized political clubs that marched in support of the party. While serving as prison commissioner, Heg even sheltered Sherman Booth, who is a federal prison escapee convicted of assisting an escaped slave named Joshua Glover to freedom. Heg believed violating the Fugitive Slave Act was a moral decision, even if it violated the law. When the Civil War broke out in 1861, Hans Heg immediately tendered his resignation to go to war, but Governor Randall refused it. By that summer, it was clear that the war effort would need a much broader mobilization. Heg's time had come. Wisconsin raised a series of ethnic units, and it had already mustered majority German and Irish regiments. A committee of Norwegian Americans petitioned Governor Randall to allow them to raise a regiment with Heg at its head. On October 1st, Governor Randall commissioned Heg colonel of the 15th Wisconsin. Hans Heg's entire life up to that point was preparing him for this moment. His central role in the Norwegian American community, overcoming the early loss of his mother, the determination he had shown on his travels in California, and the leadership he displayed at the local and state level all uniquely situated him as the most able and respected member of his community and the clear choice for that role. He attended rallies and spoke to the need for his community to act in this moment of crisis.
The government of our adopted country is in danger. It is our duty as brave and intelligent citizens to extend our hands in defense of the cause of our country and our home.
The 15th Wisconsin was a closely knit regiment. Heg's brother Ole was quartermaster. His brother-in-law was the surgeon. Reverend Clausen, who preached the first Norwegian Lutheran service in Evan Heg's barn in 1843, joined as chaplain. The regiment mustered into federal service for 3 years on February 14, 1862. Passing through Chicago, they were presented with a set of colors. The 15th remained in the area of New Madrid, Missouri, and Island No. 10 throughout the spring, performing garrison duty. In June, the unit was assigned to Davis's division, that soon would be transferred to the Army of the Cumberland. Joining the division near Iuka, Mississippi, Heg and his men first traveled into northern Alabama before joining the rest of the army on the race up to Kentucky. In October, Heg and his men saw their first combat at Perryville. The 15th was on the edge of the fighting and endured heavy artillery fire while advancing towards the village. They captured a portion of the rebel ammunition reserve before being pulled back without the loss of a man. In December, Heg and his men led the advance out of Nashville during the Stones River campaign. Finding an enemy battery, Heg led his men in a bayonet charge that captured a gun and drove off the rest of the battery. At Stones River, in the route of the Union right flank, Heg stubbornly held position after position, slowing the Confederate advance and buying time for routing units to get to safety and reform. The 15th Wisconsin lost heavily here, but Heg won acclaim for his coolness under fire and sound judgment. His actions on December 30, 1862 helped save the army and turn a probable defeat into victory. Beginning in February 1863, Heg was promoted to brigade command. He had built a reputation as a conscientious officer who both drove his men hard and looked after them like a father. In a mark of the esteem in which Heg was held by his commanders, he and his brigade were selected for a dangerous and difficult assignment to start off the Chickamauga campaign. Crossing the Tennessee River in boats, they established a bridgehead as Army engineers worked to construct a ferry and pontoon bridge. By the middle of September, William Rosecrans was trying to move his Union Army of the Cumberland north along the Lafayette Road into the safety of Chattanooga. He did this in the face of heavy numbers of troops reinforcing Braxton Bragg's Army of Tennessee. Beginning in small skirmishes on September 18th, this would erupt the next day into the Battle of Chickamauga. Around 1 p.m., Heg and his brigade arrived on the battlefield at a critical moment. The Union right was in danger of being flanked, and Davis's division, Heg included, was ordered to attack and secure the flank. Unfortunately, the division moved too far south, leaving more than a half-mile gap in the Union line, and largely fought a separate battle. Heg's brigade led the advance, and crashing through the heavy woods north of Vineyards Field, struck Bushrod Johnson's Confederate division. After a hard fight, Heg pulled his men back to the Lafayette Road. As the rest of the division came up, they plunged back into the woods, this time striking Hood's division from the Army in Northern Virginia. In the seesaw battle that followed, Heg and his men tried to hold their position along the road. He was conspicuous in his bravery, riding along the lines, encouraging his men, rallying them when they were pushed back, leading them on when they advanced. Both sides sent in more troops, and the Confederates were able to push the Federal troops back across the road for a time. The Union launched a counterattack to push back over the road. Riding among his men, now below half strength, Heg was shot through the bowels. Heg was rushed to the Federal Field Hospital at Lee and Gordon's Mill. Throughout the night, officers came to visit him, including his friend, Albert Skosted.
From early childhood, his characteristic had been that of cheerfulness and patience. One could not associate with him without feeling the magic of his power to dispel gloom and sorrow. In the hour of his death, this did not desert him. The same peaceful atmosphere which surrounded him in life did then. From the nature of his wound, his sufferings were severe, but he uttered no complaint.
Hans Christian Heg was buried with a Masonic funeral. The Norwegian Society of America commissioned Paul Fjeld of Norway to cast a statue in his honor. Copies were erected in Lear, Norway, and Waterford, Wisconsin, as well as on the steps of the Capitol in Madison in 1926.
We want to say thank you to so many people across the country who have stepped up, as we mentioned we're going to shoot this episode, and sent photos to help us have a better story to tell you to illuminate Hans's life. Thanks for spending your time with us. We'll see you soon.